In this tutorial, I'll show you how to create this marble run physics animation in Blender. So in this tutorial, we'll be creating kind of this shorter, more simple physics animation, just so that the tutorial isn't super long. But then after you follow this tutorial and learn all the basics of how to make a marble run simulation, then in your own time, you can create your own more interesting and more complex marble simulation. And if you're interested in purchasing the finished tutorial project files, you can find that with the links in the description, and that's a great way to help support this channel. And if you are interested in making your own more complex marble simulations, then the project files will also come with my marble run asset pack, which comes with all of these different marble assets, and the assets are modular, meaning that you can turn on Blender's snapping feature, and then you can just move the models around and you can stick them together and create your own marble run simulation. And they're all pre-set up in Blender's asset browser, so if you add the assets as an asset library into Blender, then you can just drag and drop all the different objects into your 3D scene. And the asset pack also comes with all of these different marble materials, and the marble materials also have some different procedural materials, like some marble materials, some metal materials, and glass materials. Now I will be using a few different resources online in this tutorial, so I'm going to be downloading this HDRI, which I'll have linked in the video description. I'll be downloading the 1K version and the HDR version on Polyhaven. Now what I'll be doing is opening up this HDRI in GIMP, and I'm going to add a Gaussian blur to it, just so it's nice and blurred, because we are going to be able to see this HDRI in the background, so I'll be blurring it, so it'll still add some nice soft lighting to the scene, but that way there'll just be some little blobs of colors in the background, and it will just add a nice ambient background. That is totally optional. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. Now I'm also going to be using a bunch of my procedural marble materials in this tutorial, and I'll be using my marble materials from my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. So if you're one of my customers of my Ultimate Procedural Material Pack, then you can just drag and drop the materials into the project and add them to the marble objects. Or if you'd like to purchase my Procedural Marble Material Pack and just get all of my marble materials, then you can get that with the links in the description on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. You can also purchase any of my marble materials individually on my Gumroad store. Or if you want to learn how to create my procedural marble materials, then you can find my marble material tutorials in my procedural material tutorial playlist linked in the description. Now I'm also going to be using this procedural wood material, and so I also have a tutorial on how to create this, so if you want to learn how to create it, you can find the link in the description. Or if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the procedural material, then you can purchase it with the links in the description, and then you can just import it or append it into the Blender file, and I'll be adding it onto the block objects. So let's first start by modeling the straight piece. So I'll just select everything, and I'm just going to delete everything. Sorry, default cube, I just deleted you. And then let's go to the add menu, and we're just going to add a new cube. Now I am going to scale all the objects down a bit so that it's a little bit better to the real life scale in Blender. So I'll just scale this object down by 0.2 and then press Ctrl A and apply the scale. Now I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'm going to go to front view, and I'll zoom into the object. And then what I'm going to do is click on this button here to turn on the snapping. So now that the snapping is on, if I hit G to grab, you can see the objects are going to move by these increments. So I can model all the objects by these increments, so that way they'll be modular, so I can model them to the correct size so they all fit together. So I'll just bring this object up, so G to grab, bring it up on the Z-axis, and just stick it right there. So the origin point is on the bottom and it's resting there on that grid line. And then we'll go into wireframe, and I'll deselect everything, and I'm just going to hit B for the box select and box select the top, and I'll hit G to grab, hit Z, and just bring it down by 2. So now we just have a cube which is just half the size. So I'm going to go back to object mode, and I will go back to solid view. So what I now want to do is model that little trench bit which the marble can run through. So I'll just make sure the 3D cursor is in the very center by pressing Shift C, and I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to add a cylinder. And I'm going to scale a cylinder down by 0.2, and I will hit Ctrl A and apply the scale. So let's now rotate the cylinder on the X-axis by 90 degrees. So if you go to front view, you can see the cylinder is pointed forward. And then with the snapping still on, I'll hit G and Z and just bring it up by 2 grids like that. So I'll now go into edit mode, and I'm going to go into wireframe, and I'm going to scale this down, and I'm going to scale it down so that it's smaller than the cube by 2 grids. So you can see here's the cube. If I zoom in, there are 2 of those like mini blender grids. I'm going to scale it down so there's 2 on this side and then also 2 on that side. So I'll go back to solid view, and let's scale it up on the y-axis so it's longer, and then go back to object mode. So I'm now going to add the Boolean modifier so that this mesh is going to cut out this mesh. So we'll select our cube, and we're going to go to the modifiers, and let's search for the Boolean modifier. And on the object here, we're going to click on the eyedropper, and we're going to choose the cylinder. So if I just select the cylinder and hit H to hide it, you can see this is what the Boolean is doing, so it's cutting out the mesh where the cylinder is. So I'll hit Alt H to bring back the cylinder. So if I select the cube again, this is set to difference, and we want it to be different, so it cuts out the cube. So click on the drop down and just apply the Boolean. And now we can just select the cylinder, and let's just hit M. We can move it into a new collection, and I'll just call it backup, and then click on create. And so that way we just have like a backup collection. So if we want to go back to this, we can, but let's just click on the check mark there just to disable the backup. I think it's a good idea just to kind of keep those objects, especially when you're still modeling and still working on the project, just because you might want to go back to it, or you might want to use the object again for another Boolean. So I think it's pretty useful just to hide it as a backup collection. Let's save our project because we haven't saved it yet. So let's click on File and Save. I'll just save it as Marble Run and then Save Blender File. And then just hit Control S as you're working on the project to save it. So I now want to add some modifiers to smooth it out. So first let's go to Add Modifier, and let's add the Bevel modifier. And I'm going to turn the segments up to 3. So now you can see we have a bevel there on the edge. Let's use the Object Context menu and shade the object smooth. And then I can also drag this amount down, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key as I drag the amount to make my movements more sensitive. And I'll go with like a 0.003, so that looks a lot nicer. And then you can see the shading just looks slightly weird kind of on the edges, and that can definitely show up on the finished material. It can just make things look slightly too smooth. You can also see like there's like a little thing right there, kind of if you move it back and forth and look at the matte cap lighting. So to fix this, I'll click on Add Modifier, and I'm going to add the Weighted Normal. So you can see the Weighted Normal is going to flatten up those flat faces and just make it look more sharp. So it makes the model look a lot nicer. So we'll select the object, and we'll hit F2 to give it a label, and I'm just going to call it straight. So now here in the collection, we have the straight piece. So I'll just move this piece over here out of the way. So the next piece that I want to create is the curve piece. So let's go to the add menu, and I'm going to add a cube. And again, to make sure this is modular, let's scale it down to the same size. So scale it down to 0.2 and apply the scale. So if I just select this, kind of move it over here, you can see it is the same size. So let's select the object, and we'll go to front view, and we'll go into wireframe and go into edit mode. I'm going to deselect everything, and I'm just going to box select the top, and let's just bring the top down, and using the snapping, it'll just snap to those grids. So now you can see it's going to be the same size. And for now, I'll keep it down here on the bottom. Now, if we go to top view, let's hit G to grab, and I'm going to drag it right up here so it's in this corner. So it's on the bottom of the grid, and on top view, you can see it's in this corner. So let's go to the add menu, and we are going to add a torus. Now, if I click right behind me on the add torus settings, we can use the major radius and the minor radius to make it the size that we want. So let's drag this way down here, drag this way down. So drag the major radius so that kind of this center point right here is about in the center of the cube. And then we can just drag the minor radius to make each side more thick. And to make the objects modular so that it's the correct size so it fits with this other piece, we want to make this have the same thickness on the edge. So let's zoom in here. So we want to make sure that this torus has 2 blender grids between the end of the cube and the torus. And then the very center, we also want to make sure it's about 2 blender grids. So I'm going to go with 0.2 on the major radius and then 0.18 on the minor radius. And then I also want to change the major and minor segments just so that it's higher resolution. So I'm going to turn the major to 64 and the minor to 32. So if I just go back to solid view, you can now see that we can use this to cut out the cube. You can see when we add the Boolean, it's going to add it correctly, and it will just cut out half of the mesh there. And it'll rotate from this side over to the other side. So we're going to add the same Boolean modifier now. So if we select the object, we'll click on add modifier, and we're going to add the Boolean. And on the object here, the eyedropper, we're going to choose the torus. And then we can just click on the dropdown and apply the modifier. And if we select the torus, let's hit M and we can move it into the backup. So now the marble can go in this side or this side and then go out the other side and it will rotate around. Now if we select this object and go to top view, let's hit G to grab and we can just drag it in here. And actually if we zoom out farther and then hit G to grab, the snapping will work a bit better and we can just bring that into the center. And just to make sure this is working correctly, if I just drag this other piece right here, you can see both of these objects are just about the same exact size, although I need to select this object. Let's go to front view and bring it up. Let's zoom out, bring it up, and using the snapping, we can stick it right there. So now you can see the objects are modular, so they're going to be the same size. So let's just select this object and we'll just kind of bring it over here. So now with this object, we want to add the same modifiers. Before I do that though, I do need to clean up the mesh a little bit, because if I go into edit mode and select everything, let's hit M and we're going to merge by distance. And you can see it removed 6 vertices. That can sometimes happen when you're adding a Boolean, is there can be overlapping vertices. So let's go back to object mode. And then if we select this object and shift select the other object, we're going to hit Control L and we can just copy modifiers. So now this object has the same modifiers. So that's going to be our next piece. So we'll just select it, kind of move it over here. Let's just kind of align it up and we can drag these over. And if I select this piece, you can rename it right here on the outliner, but I'll just press F2 and I'll just rename it to curve and then hit enter. So we'll save the project again. Now the next piece that I want to make is a long straight piece. So I'll select this piece, I'll duplicate it and drag it back here into the center, and I'll go into edit mode, and with everything selected, I'll scale it, and we're going to scale it along the y-axis, and I'll type 4 and then enter, and then go back to object mode, and I can hit F2 to rename this, and I'm going to rename this to straight long. So straight long. You could also select this, and I might rename this to straight short. So now we have straight long and straight short. So we'll select this object and let's just stick it here next to the other ones. Now I want to have another piece which is going to be curving down or moving down, and that way the marbles will actually have some momentum because of the gravity. So I'm going to select this first piece we started with and I'll go to top view and I'll duplicate it and just stick it right there. So let's now hit the / on the numpad to go into local space so we can just see this object, or we can just hide the other object in the view. And let's go to side view and I'll go into edit mode and go into wireframe, and I'll just deselect everything, and we're just going to box select all of these vertices on this side but not the ones on the very bottom. So if I zoom out, I'll hit G and Z and I'm just going to bring it up by 2 blender grids and then go back to solid view. And that's it. So we can hit / to go out of local view. And now we have this piece here, but it's the same exact size, so it's modular. So if I go to top view, just kind of drag this over here. Let's zoom into it. And if I go to side view, I can bring it down. So now you can see it's modular. So the marbles can roll along here and then roll down on the slope piece. So let's just drag the slope piece over here and I'll just bring it up here just like that. And let's just rename this. So I'm just going to call this slope. So now what I want to do is create some little blocks, and we'll use the blocks to kind of hold these pieces up and just add some more visual interest to the scene. So I'm going to add a new cube. We'll scale it down by 0.2 and again apply the scale. And then we're just going to use the same modifiers. So if I select this object, shift select the first object, Control L, and we're going to copy the modifiers, and then I'll just shade that object smooth. Let's go to top view or front view, and I'll bring this up here and just stick it over there. And then we'll duplicate this and have one more over here. And this one, if I go into edit mode, we'll go to wireframe. We're just going to box select the top and bring it down. It's easier if you zoom out and bring it down by 2 grids like that. Maybe bring the entire thing up by 2 grids. And then back in object mode, we can bring it down. So the origin point is at the bottom, and we'll bring that over there. Then I want to have a much longer one. So we'll select this cube and we'll duplicate it and bring it into the center. And if I go into edit mode, we'll just box select the top, and we're going to bring this up by 4 grids. So it's double the size. So I can select all the objects and move them over. So now we just have 3 of these kind of cube pieces, and let's just rename these. So I'm going to rename this one to block large. This one here, hit F2. I'm going to call this block small, and then hit this one. And this one I'm just going to call block. So we have a small block, a large block, and a regular block. So let's just bring these objects out of the way, and let's model another piece. So the next piece that I want to model is an elevator. So we're actually going to animate the elevator piece moving up and down. And the elevator is going to be curved slightly so that when the elevator comes down, the marbles can fall into the scene. And then when the elevator moves up, it'll fall into the next elevator. So we're going to select this piece here, the slope, and we're going to duplicate it and just move it here back into the center. So just go to top view and move it here into the exact center, because this is going to be the basic shape of that slope piece. So we'll go into wireframe, we'll go to front view and go into edit mode. And I'm going to deselect everything and just box select the bottom. And let's just bring the bottom way down. We're going to bring it pretty far, maybe something like that. We can adjust this later if we need to. So we'll go back to object mode, and we'll now go to top view and we're going to rotate it by 90 degrees. And actually to hit negative, so it's rotated by negative 90, so it's sloping down this way. And let's just drag this piece over right there. And then I'll hit F2 to rename this, and I'll just call this elevator. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it lift or elevator or whatever you want to call it. Now there's one more thing that I want to do to this object, and that is that I want to parent it to another object. So basically what we're going to do in the animation is we're going to animate this moving up and down, but then we're going to give it another object which it's parented to, so we can duplicate the object and move it different places in the scene, even though it's animated up and down. So I'm going to hit Shift S, and I'll go to cursor to selected, so the cursor's in the center there. Then I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to add an empty, and let's add an empty sphere. And I'll scale the empty sphere down to about there, to that size. And let's just rename this. So I'm going to call this empty elevator empty. So there we go, elevator empty. So now if I select this object and then shift select the empty, I'll hit Control P and set parent to object keep transform. So now we'll be able to animate this object, but then we can use this object to move the object around, even though this object is moving up and down. So now let's model the marbles. So I'll center the 3D cursor, and to make the marbles, I'm just going to add a mesh. We're just going to add a mesh UV sphere, and I'll just shade the sphere smooth. Now I'm going to scale this object down to a 0.13 and then hit enter. So 0.13, I think that is a pretty good size. Let's press Control A and apply the scale. So if I just drag this over here and kind of stick it right in here, you can see it nicely fits there in those modular pieces. So I'm just going to bring this piece right over here and maybe bring it up, and let's hit F2 to rename this, and I'm going to rename this to marble. So I now want to model that metal track piece. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the first object that we started with. We can duplicate it and move it over. And then what you can also do is you can hit Alt G to clear the locations. So if it's moved over, Alt G, that's going to center the origin point into the center of the scene. So wherever the origin point of the object is, when you hit Alt G, that'll clear it and put it into the center. So we'll zoom into the object, and I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'll go to face select. And I'm going to select these faces here, but not the two faces in the center, and then these two, and then these two. So I'll now press Control I to invert the selection, and we're going to hit X and delete the faces. So those pieces there are going to be the track pieces. So we'll select everything, we'll hit E to extrude, but then we're going to hit the escape key, so it's extruded but it's not moved around at all, and then we're going to hit Alt S. Alt S is going to scale the object along the normals, so that'll be the direction of where the faces are pointing. Drag this down here, drag it down, and then click to place that there. And then if I select everything, let's hit Shift N to recalculate the object's normals. So let's go to top view, and I'll go into edit mode, and we'll go to wireframe, and I'm just going to go to the vertex select, and I'm just going to box select these vertices here, and let's extrude it out, kind of bring it maybe to about there, just however far you want. We can of course adjust this later, and I'm now going to turn off the snapping, and I'm going to zoom into it pretty close, and we'll extrude it. So hit E to extrude, then hit R to rotate, and then hit G to grab. And we're just going to do that all the way around. So E to extrude, R to rotate, G to grab, E to extrude, R to rotate, G to grab, and we're just going to make a nice curve here. So just kind of have it curving around. And then once it looks pretty straight, if you just rotate it so it looks pretty straight, you can then scale it on the x-axis and type 0 and enter just to flatten it. And then we can just extrude it out like that. So later in the video, we are going to be kind of changing how the shape of this model is so that it'll work well for the animation. But for now, we're just going to leave it like that. Now what I can also do is go to top view again and zoom in here. And you can see right here, this part looks a little bit like straight, and you can see like some little sharp points there. So what I'm going to do is go into edit mode, and I'll hit Control R to add a loop cut, and you can left click and right click so the loop cut stays in the center. And then if you just hit G to grab, you can hold down the shift key after you hit G to grab to make your movements more sensitive, and just drag it up slightly. So I'll do this again. So Control R, and then left click and right click so it stays in the center. Then you can hit G to grab. You can hold down the shift key to make your movements more sensitive, and I'm just dragging it back a little bit so it looks more smooth. Just add a few different loop cuts here and drag it back a little bit on some of these larger points, kind of on the outside. You could do it for the inside here, but for the inside, the faces here or the loops are really close to each other. So I don't want to add it for all of them, but on the outside, the loops are a bit larger. So now it looks just a little bit more smooth. Now what I also want to do is create like some long cylinders here to hold this piece up, so it actually looks like it could be in the real world. So in edit mode, let's go to the add menu, and we're going to add a cylinder. And what I want to do is delete the faces on the top and bottom. So if we click on the face select and select both of these faces, we're just going to delete the faces. Let's now hit the L key with our mouse hovered over that object to select the entire piece, and we're going to scale it way down. If I go to front view, let's zoom in here, and I'm going to move it over like that, and then scale it way down. And then if we go to front view, let's bring it down on the Z-axis, and then we'll scale it up on the z-axis and bring it down again. So because this piece is curving, I want this piece to curve as well so it can just fit inside there. So first, let's just bring it up just as big as we need it on that side. And what I'll now do is click here to turn on proportional editing. And I'll go to the vertex select, and we're going to select this vertex, and I'll hit G to grab and then bring it up on the z-axis. Now the problem with this is it's moving up the entire piece. So what I'm going to do is click on the drop down here, and we're going to choose connected only. This way, if I hit G to grab, bring it up on the z-axis, it's only going to bring up the mesh which is connected. And then I can scroll my mouse wheel to change the size of the proportional editing. So I'll make it pretty small and just drag this right up there. Just bring it up there so that it's curving. So if I go into wireframe, you can see now that piece there is curving over. So let's hit the L key with our mouse over that piece. We'll duplicate it and bring it over on the x-axis, and then we'll scale it along the x-axis by -1. So -1, hit enter, and now it's going to be flipped. And we probably need to hit Shift N to recalculate the normals. There we go. So now if we go to top view and go to wireframe, we'll just drag this right in there and just look at this from bottom view, maybe drag it back a little bit and just make sure it's fitting right there inside that piece. Now I think both of these pieces could be a little bit more thin, so a way to scale them individually is hit the L key to select both of these pieces. We can turn off proportional editing because we don't need that anymore. And then if we click here on the transform pivot point, let's change this to individual origins. And I can now scale them both down, but I want to scale them down not along the z-axis. So I'll hit Shift Z. This way I can just make them a bit more thin. So just bring that down like that and make them a bit more thin. And then we can change the transform pivot point back to median point. So now we have those little cylinder pieces there. And if we go to top view in edit mode, we'll go to wireframe and just drag this over to the end like that. And then we'll duplicate these pieces, bring it over here, and we can rotate it by 90 degrees and just stick that right there in the center on that end. And then if you want to, you can add them to this side and this side of the curve. So I'll go into wireframe and I'll duplicate this and stick it right about there. And then we can deselect everything. We'll just hover our mouse over these pieces and hit the L key to select these pieces. And we'll hit Shift D to duplicate and then click with our middle mouse wheel to constrain it to the y-axis and just stick it right there. So let's hit F2 to rename this object. And I'm going to call this like track, or you can call it metal track, whatever you want to call it. Let's go to top view and I'm just going to bring this right over here. Let's also first turn on the snapping and then just bring this over here so it kind of snaps. And because we modeled this from the original base object here, if I just bring this right over here using the snapping, you can see it's going to be modular, and so it's going to connect perfectly. So just hit Control S to save again, and so we've now modeled all of these 10 different pieces, and so these are all the modular assets that we'll be using to create the animation. Alright, so I've now opened up the HDRI in GIMP and I'm going to blur it. Now you could use whatever 2D program you want, you don't have to use GIMP. GIMP is just a free open source 2D program I have on my computer, and you could also completely skip this step if you just don't want to do it. So what I'm now going to do is click here on filters and I'm going to go to blur and I'm going to choose Gaussian blur. And I'm just going to blur it up by about 25. I think around 25 is pretty good, and then click on OK. So now it's blurred, and then we're going to be adding this in the background, in the world background, just to give some nice lighting and a nice kind of blurry background so it's not too distracting. But one other thing that I want to do is I want to make this really bright part a little bit darker. So what I'm going to do is click here to go to the clone tool. And again, if you're using some other 2D program, pretty much any professional 2D programs like GIMP or Krita or Photoshop should have a clone tool. So I'll hold down Control and then click here, and that's going to add a point. And then I can go along here and just add that right there. So going along here and over here and just kind of blur that out. All right, and then one other thing that I want to do is go to the smudge tool. And then I'm just going to go along here and smudge this. And you can also change the size here. You can change like the size of your brush if you want to, right over here on the side. But I'm just going to go along here and just kind of smudge it. And that's really going to be it. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Again, totally optional. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. But now I'll click on File, and I'm just going to export as. And I'm just going to export this as the HDRI, but with blurred HDR, and then just export this. And then that'll save, and now we can just close GIMP. So to add in the HDRI, let's go here to the shading workspace, but then right here, instead of object on the shader nodes, we're going to go to world instead. So now we're going to go to the add menu and we're going to search for the environment texture, drop this here. We'll plug the color into the color. Let's go into the rendered viewport mode so I can see this, and I'll be using the Cycles rendering engine in this tutorial. You could definitely use Eevee if you want to, but I'm going for Cycles so it looks more realistic. So let's click on open to open the texture. And here's the blurred HDRI, so I'll just open this image. And so you can see it gives some nice soft lighting. It is pretty dark, and so we are going to add some other lights, but it gives some nice soft lighting. Now if you look around here, you can see there's a little line here, and that line is because we blurred the HDRI, but this is the edge of the HDRI. So it was blurred, but it wasn't blurred to be seamless. But I don't really mind this little line right here. It's going to be really hard to see in the animation, and also it kind of just looks like maybe there's a wall in the back of the scene if this was photographed in like an indoor scene, which it was. So I'm just going to leave that how it is. I'm not going to worry about that. Now also, if you enable the Node Wrangler add-on in the user preferences with the HDRI selected, you can hit Control-T, and that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And then if you want to, you can rotate this HDRI around, and you can kind of change the lighting slightly. So if you kind of look at the objects, you can kind of rotate around if you want to. I'm going to turn this to 180 so the HDRI is flipped around, just because when we do the final scene, I like how that lighting looks just a little bit better. And then here on the background strength, I'm going to turn this strength to a 0.7 so it's even less bright. Now what I also want to do is make the colors more contrasted. So if I go here to the render properties and scroll down to the very bottom, let's open up the color management, and I'm going to set the view transform to filmic, and I'll set the look to very high contrast, so it pops out the colors and make things look more saturated. Let's change the world nodes back to object nodes, and then we can go back here to the layout. And I'll go into the rendered viewport mode, and what I now just want to do is add a few lights. So I'll go to the add menu, let's just go here to light, and I'll add an area light. Let's just bring the area light up here and maybe rotate it over, and maybe scale it up and bring it over like this. And then if I click down here to go to the object data properties of the light, I'll turn the power to 1000, so it's a lot brighter. And then let's go to top view, and I'll duplicate this light and move it over and rotate it, so we have kind of two lights here which are kind of lighting up the objects. And I think both of these lights could be scaled up even a little bit bigger. So now we're going to be adding all the different materials onto the objects, and they're all going to be procedural materials. And I'm going to be using many materials which I've already created. So I have tutorials on how to create all these materials. So if you want to like search for them on my YouTube channel, you can, and you can learn how to create these materials and then add them into the Blender file. Or you can also purchase the materials on my Gumroad store. Or if you've already purchased my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, then you'll have all these materials in my Ultimate Material Pack. So what I'm going to start by doing is adding the procedural wood to some of these objects. So what I have done is I've created this little assets tab, so I can click over here on the assets tab, and then here I have my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. So if I just start to type in wood here, I can type in wood, and I'm going to add this wood 3 material. So I can just click and drag and drop it onto the object. Now if I go into the rendered viewport mode, we have this procedural wood on the object. So I'm going to go back over here to the layout. Now, if you've purchased this material as an individual material, or if you've done the tutorial and you just need to import the material into your project, what you can do is click on File and then click on Append. Then you can just locate to wherever the Blender file is with the wood material. So I'll go into this Blender file here, and then I'm going to go into the materials. And then we have wood 1, 2, and 3. So you can just click on wood 3, and then you can click on Append. And then if you go into the rendered view and go into the drop down here, you can just select that wood material. You can see it's been renamed to .001. That's because I already had the other wood material. I'm just going to delete this wood material because I already have the wood 3 here from my Ultimate Material Pack. So then what I'm going to do is select this object and then shift select all the other objects here. And then lastly, select this object. Actually select that one too, and then lastly select this object. So this object is the active object, so I'll hit Control L, and we're going to link the materials. So you can see they all have the same materials. And then I do want to do a few things to change the material settings, so I think it's easier just to go to the shading workspace, and now we have this customizable node group which we can use to customize the look of the material. So one thing that I want to do is change the colors. So for this color here, I'm going to make it a little bit more red and a little bit darker. And then this color here, I'll make it a little bit brighter. And if you do want to use the exact same colors that I'm using, you can punch in the same hex values. So here's the hex value for color 1. And then here is the hex value for color 2. And then here is the hex value for color 3. So you can just pause the video and you can punch those in if you want to use the exact same color, but I just kind of customized the colors. I made them maybe a little bit more red, a little bit brighter, and I just like how the wood looks by changing those colors. Then here on the roughness, I'm going to turn the roughness down to a 0.6, so it's a little bit more of a shiny piece of wood. And then I'll turn this bump strength way down to like a 0.02, so the wood looks a lot more flat and it looks like it's been polished. So it's like a nice polished wood with a nice shiny finish on it. Now if I select this wood piece, let's just duplicate it and move it up here, and we'll go to top view. If I continue to duplicate this wood piece, you can see because it's the same exact wood piece, all of the procedural materials look exactly the same on the wood. but this is a natural wood block, and so every wood block would have a slightly different texture variation. So to fix this, I'm going to select the wood material here, select the node group, and I'll hit tab to go into the node group. And what I'm going to do is search for the object info node, and I'll drop it here. Now if I Control Shift select the object info and click on it again, so Control Shift and select it until we're previewing the random is going to make random values per object from white to black. And so we can actually take this data, the white and black data, this random value, and we can stick it into the mapping location. So now if I just hit tab and then Control Shift select the wood here, you can see each wood object now is going to have a slightly different variation of where the wood texture is placed. And that is because the white and black values are randomly kind of moving the location values around, because black equals 0 and then white equals 1. So if you take a look at the wood, let's just hit tab to go into the node group, and I'll just Control Shift select this color up here. You can see they all look different now, whereas if I select the object info and just hit M to mute it, they all look the same. But then if I hit M to unmute it, it's just randomly moving them all around. So I'm just going to select all of these and we'll just delete the objects. We don't need them. If I select the main object again, let's just Control Shift select the wood material. So now they all have slightly different variations of the locations of the wood. So now let's add this metal material to the track. So I'm going to select the tracks here. Let's click on new, and I'm going to rename this material to like track metal. And let's zoom out here. Here's the principled shader, and this is going to be a pretty simple shader. So I'm going to make the base color just this kind of mid gray color. Here's the hex value that I'll be using, just a nice gray color. And then I'm going to turn the metallic value to 1 so it's shiny, and then I'll turn the roughness to a 0.25. So that's going to be it for the material. You could of course add a more complex material, but I'm just going to keep it pretty simple. So let's go back here to the layout, and I'm going to navigate over here to this marble here, and I'll go to top view, and I'm going to hit Shift D and then drag the marble over here and then just place it right there. So because I did that in one action, I can press Shift R to repeat the last action, and I'm going to now make 8 of these marbles. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then if you want to, you can go here in the outliner and just rename all the marble objects. So I'm going to rename all these marbles 1 through 8. So now what I'm going to do is click back here on the Assets tab, which I've created in Blender. But if you want to get to the asset browser, you can of course just click and drag in the corner, split the window, and then on the editor type, you can change this to the asset browser. But let me just close this. So here in the asset browser, I have my Ultimate Material Pack set up as an asset library. So I'm going to delete the wood search, and I'm going to search for marble. Or if you want to, you can also just go down here and find the marble in the outliner. And now what I can do is I can just click and drag and just drop all of these marble materials on to the marbles. So just drop all the materials here. I'm going to add this one, also this one. And of course, if you want to watch these tutorials, then you can find them on my YouTube channel, or you can also purchase my marble and granite material pack, which comes with all of these different marble and granite materials. Now, I also thought it would be cool if we added like a shiny metal one. So on this last one here, I'm just going to click on new here in the shaders to add a new material, and I'll just call this like a metal marble or metal ball, whatever you want to call it. And then for this, let's just make the base color kind of like a light gray. We'll turn the metallic all the way up to 1, and then we'll turn the roughness way down so it's pretty reflective. So now what I'm going to do is click back here to go to the shading workspace so I can see this in a bit larger kind of full screen. And I'm just going to kind of edit some of these materials. And in my Ultimate Procedural Material Pack, all of my materials are set up as these customizable node groups. So I can easily just like adjust the scale. So I might just turn the scale down to like a 0.7. And then this one here, maybe I'll turn the scale down as well to like maybe a 0.8 or maybe even like a 0.6. This one here, I think I might turn the scale up. So let's take the blue marble and maybe turn that up to like a 2. That looks pretty cool. And then one other thing that I want to do is I want to make a red marble. So we already have a couple of black marbles. So I thought maybe this one here, this material doesn't look that interesting. And I thought what I would do is duplicate it and make it red instead. So what I can do is click on the blue marble, and then I can click and drag here from the materials, and I can drop it onto this one here. So they're both blue. But then I can click on this button here, which looks like 2 little paper icons to duplicate the material. And I can just call this red marble. So now that this is a separate material, what I can do is just change the colors here. So maybe I'll make this kind of like a dark red, and then the color here, I'll make that like a really black color. Now it's a little bit hard to see it because it's black here. So maybe I'll take the color and make it a little bit darker. But then what I can also do is hit tab to go here into the customizable node group. Even though the node group is customizable here outside of the node group, you can still hit tab to go into the node group, and you can adjust some of the settings. So on the top color ramp, I'm just going to drag this over just to make it a little bit darker. So you can kind of see that black a little bit bigger like that. I can also just kind of play around with this white tab right here to make it a bit thicker. So something like that. Now you can see it's adjusting the other material. So if I hit tab to go out of the node group, let's select the other material, and I'm going to click on this button here to duplicate it so it's its own material. And then if I hit tab to go into the node group, I can just kind of adjust this and kind of fix that there. Kind of drag this back, do whatever I want, just like that. So now we have like a blue one, an aqua one, we have a few black ones, and then we also have this really shiny one. You could also add like a glass one if you want to. That would be cool to add like a glass material so it's really reflective and you can see through it. But that's what I'm going to do for all the marble objects. All right, so we're now going to add all of the different physics to the objects. So I'll just go back here to the layout and go back to solid view. So let's first select this marble here, and let's just minimize this, just kind of close this so it's smaller. Let's just open up the side panel, and we're going to go to the physics properties. And we want to add the rigid body physics. Now, if I open up the surface response right here, there is this friction value. And I find that this friction value at default is a bit too high friction, and so the balls tend to slow down. So I'm going to make the friction of the marble down to like a 0.2. So that way there's going to be less friction and it will move more smoothly and it'll move faster. So that's the only segments that we're going to add. The rigid body, we're going to leave the type set to active, that's fine, and then the friction at 0.2. And we're also going to leave the shape at convex hull, that will be fine for these objects. So I now want to add the same exact physics to all the marbles. So if we just select all the marbles and then lastly shift select this one, which has the rigid body, we're going to click on object and we're going to go down here to rigid body, and we're going to click on copy from active. So now if you click on all the objects, you can see they all have the marble physics. Now, before I play the animation, if you're a video editor like me, so if you do video editing in Blender, then you might have this playback option set to sync to audio. I use this in Blender's video editor, so it syncs up the audio and the video. But when you're doing simulations in Blender, it's better if you click on play every frame. That way it'll play every frame, even if it has to kind of slow things down. So just make sure this is set to play every frame, but it should be on default. So now if I just hit the space bar to play, you can see, there we go, I've lost all my marbles. Sorry, I just had to say that. So we know that now the physics are working correctly. So now let's select the main piece here, the little straight piece, and we're going to add rigid body as well. But if I play this, you can see it's going to fall with the gravity. And so I want it to interact with the marbles, but not be affected by the gravity. So on the active type here, we're going to change it to passive. And this way, if I just like duplicate this marble, let's just go to top view, stick it right here. Let's bring it up. If I hit the space bar to play this, you can see now it's interacting with the marble, but it's not actually falling. So it is static. So if you want the objects to move, they need to be set to active. If you want the objects to stay where they are, they need to be set to passive. Now you can see if I play this, there is a big issue here, and that is that it stops and doesn't fall down. And that is because of the collision shape. So you can see right here on the collision shape, it's set to convex hull. And so I believe what it's doing is basically creating a box around the mesh. And so it's not actually interacting with the shape of the object. So this will make the simulation faster because it won't have to calculate the actual shape of the mesh. However, it's going to ruin the animation in this case. So instead of convex hull, we want to change it to mesh. So if I go back to the starting and then play this again, you can see now it's looking a lot better. There still is a bit of an issue because there's a gap, but it is falling down there inside the object. So let's fix this gap issue. So this gap issue is because there is a bit of a distance in between all the objects. So we just need to fix that. So if you select the main object again, we want to go here to the sensitivity and we want to turn down this margin. So I'm going to turn this margin down to a 0.001. So 0.001. Now if I play this, you can see it looks like it's falling correctly. If I go to front view and just go to wireframe, you can see that looks correct. There's like a tiny little bit of a gap, but that's so small it's not going to really be noticed. So that is looking great. So I'm just going to keep this marble here for now because I'm going to use it for some of the other objects to make sure they're working. So that is it for the physics for that object. So I now just want to add it to the other object. So what I'm going to do is hold down the shift key and I'm going to select the metal track, also the down piece, the curve piece, the long straight piece, and then lastly shift select this piece here. So select all of these objects. I'm now going to go to object and we're going to go to rigid body and we're going to do the copy from active. And because this was the active object, now all of these objects have the same modifiers. So now I want to add physics to the elevator piece. So what we're going to do on the elevator is we're going to add rigid body. We're also going to change the type to passive so it doesn't move. Now this object is going to be animated. We're going to animate it going back and forth and up and down. So we actually need to check mark this animated button because if the object is animated and the animated isn't checked, then it's not going to work correctly. So make sure the animated is turned on. Now also because this has an inset right here, we need to change the shape here to a mesh as well so it can fall, the marbles can fall inside the gap. And then also we need to do the same thing. So this margin here on the sensitivity, I need to turn this to a 0.001 just a 0.001, so you can just select this object, move it over here, and just play the animation and make sure that is working correctly, so it's interacting correctly. So now what I want to do is add physics to these little box pieces. So I'll just select one of them, we're going to add rigid body, and on the active type, again, we need to change to passive so it doesn't move. Now the object's not animated, so we don't need to turn on animated, and then because these are just square pieces, or they're just boxes, we can just leave the shape at the convex hull. But then here on the collision, let's turn on the collision margin, so check mark that, and here on the margin, let's turn it to a 0.001, just a 0.001, so if we go to top view and move this object over, if we play this, you can see that falls correctly, and now it's interacting with that object. So if we select these two pieces, and lastly select this, we'll go object, we're going to go to rigid body, and again, copy from active. Now there are a couple pieces that I want to change the friction. So there's a few of these objects that I find when the marble is moving along it, because the friction is too high, the marble kind of slows down. So I want to select the track piece, and I find when the marble is moving along the track, it gets too slow. So on the friction, I'll turn this to like a 0.2. Also this curve piece right here, this curve piece, it kind of tends to slow down a bit. So I'm going to turn the friction to 0.2 on this one as well. And also this straight long piece right here, let's also turn the friction to a 0.2. Now there is one more thing that I wanted to mention about the friction value, and that is that if you turn the friction value down, the marbles are going to slide more on the objects, but they're also not going to roll as much. So that might look a bit unrealistic because they might be more sliding instead of rolling, so you may not want to turn the friction down too low. So I'm just going to select this object here, the other marble, we don't need this, so I'll just delete that object. And right here in the outliner, I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to call this base objects, because these are all the base objects that we can use, so we can copy them, and we can use this to create the marble as animation. And then also let's select both of these lights, and we're going to hit M, we're going to move them into a new collection, and let's just call this collection lights and camera. So lights and camera, click on create. So now they're in their own lights and camera collection. So we'll just save the project, and this is going to be it for part 1 of the tutorial series. So because this tutorial is a little bit long, I'm just going to be breaking it up into 2 parts. So the next part, we're going to be kind of compiling everything together. We're going to be configuring everything, and because these are modular assets, we'll be putting them next to each other and creating a really cool animation, and then we'll bake the animation and render it out and get the finished animation. So when part 2 is released, the link will be in the video description, and I'll also have it right up there on the end screen. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 2.